Practical copywriting and marketing advice from the book Magic Words: What to Say to Get Your Way by the famous Wharton business professor Jonah Berger. Use the present tense. Analyzing around 250,000 Amazon book reviews reveals that present tense increased impact. Saying a book is rather than was a good read, or has rather than had great plot development, led other people to find a review more helpful. Music reviews that use more present tense verbs were more persuasive. We see the same pattern with consumer electronics, services, restaurants, in cases where we're using is rather than was. Now, a lot of people may have been taught to use the past tense, but when it comes to copywriting, when it comes to persuasion, you really want to focus on the present tense because it's more persuasive. It suggests that the product will continue to deliver what it delivered for the person that's reviewing the product. So, for example, use had instead of use has instead of had, use lowers instead of lowered, and use helps instead of helped. So, an example of this, you could say our product is voted Motor Trend Car of the Year instead of was voted Motor Trend Car of the Year. Another key thing is to use concrete language. When we analyzed almost 1,000 email interactions, when employees used more concrete language, customers spent 30% more with the retailer in the following weeks. So, for example, instead of saying refunds, say money back. Instead of furniture, table. Instead of pants, jeans. Instead of go, walk. Now, one way you can analyze your text to see if you're using enough concrete language is textanalyzer.org. I have a little screenshot here of where you would input your text to get analyzed, and that way you could easily modify your copywriting based on that. However, sometimes abstract language is needed. Concrete terms aren't always what people are looking for. So, the example from the book here is Uber. Uber could have been positioned to investors as just a ride hailing app, basically a taxi app. Or what they did correctly was position it as a transportation solution. The idea here is by going with something more abstract and broad, you're able to make the TAM, the total addressable market, seem much larger. And indeed, it was in the case of Uber. It wasn't just about a fraction of the taxi services that are out there and getting them onto mobile apps. It's really about creating a whole new market. So, in a case like that, abstraction is more important. Another comment I would make here is that when you're doing brand copywriting, when you're trying to do long term brand building, you might want to go with something a little more abstract. Whereas when you're trying to sell something here and now, product marketing or direct response marketing, that's when you really need to get into the concrete details so that people know exactly what it is you're delivering and not just in sort of a general vague sense or a general category of what you're selling. So there's a huge difference here between long-term copywriting and immediate response types of copywriting. All right, some other tactical examples here. You want to use the word because. Now, there's been famous research from the book Persuasion and Influence and Persuasion, where we can see that compliance is far more likely if you just give a reason. And we see here a 50% increase in compliance by telling somebody you want them to do something because of a given reason. And what that reason is doesn't really matter. It's what matters is you gave a reason. You use the word because. Another thing is to use the word recommend instead of like. You have a 32% more likelihood of someone taking you up on your suggestion by using recommend. So when you have people writing product reviews for your product, encourage them to write recommend, not just like. Another key thing is you want to use is not and not versus isn't versus the contraction. That makes people willing to pay $3 more based on the research in the book. Surprising. Another key tip is to use nouns and use them more than verbs. So let's take some specific examples here. You can ask someone to be a helper instead of asking them for help. This led to about a 1/3 increase in help. You can call somebody a hard worker instead of hardworking. You can call yourself an innovator instead of innovative, for example, with something like your resume. You can ask people to be a listener, to be a leader, to be a top performer instead of just sort of talking about perform well or listen to me. And we can also do the opposite. We can say, okay, you don't want the identity of being cheater or a liar, then don't be a cheater or a liar. So really what we're doing here is we're playing the identity game. The more people want to identify with something, the more likely they are to do what you're requesting. And if they want to distance themselves from something that's stigmatized, then use the labels, use the nouns rather than the verbs. And that can be very, very persuasive. You want to use emotional language, except when you're dealing with utilitarian purchases. So let's look at some research here. So nearly half of Yelp reviews are 5 stars. The average Amazon product rating is 4.2 out of 5. There's only a small relationship between product quality and Amazon rating. And restaurants, movies, books that have more emotional reviews sell more. So, really, what we find here is looking at the emotional language used in reviews can be more insightful than the ratings themselves, which tend to be inflated. So, for example, the keywords we're going to want to look for are things like beautiful and best, mind blowing and noteworthy, childish and unclear. This is on the negative side, repulsive and dumb. So, when you're trying to encourage people to write product reviews for you, use these types of terms. However, this emotional language, beautiful and best, it doesn't work for utilitarian purchases. So, emotionality, for example, is not going to help you sell more razors. It's not going to help you sell more glue because people are just looking for real functional benefits here. They want glue that hardens quickly. They want a razor that cuts. They want a toaster that makes toast. Basically, they're hiring these products to achieve a job, not to have some sort of emotional experience the way they might with luxury goods, for example. And when you start to tell stories about your product, what you really want to do is you want to give positive and negative. So you see this all the time with engaging stories through movies, where the person's about to have their final breakthrough. They it's a rags to riches story, and they're about to make it, but then they don't, and then they're about to make it again, but then the enemy comes in and defeats them or betrays them, and then it goes down. So this sort of roller coaster element of positive and negative emotion is really driving a lot of engagement. So I would encourage you to put that into things such as your YouTube videos. Another key thing you want to use is the emotion of uncertainty. Clickbait can get attention, but it's not going to keep it. So you can use all sorts of sensationalized headlines, but it's not going to be very effective other than generating the click. What will keep attention throughout is uncertainty. And can be created with emotional language that increases engagement. People are 30% more likely to finish an article that made them feel anxious than made them sad. So, for example, some of the most effective YouTube videos, and I've worked with some of the top YouTubers out there, is they'll start with the ending basically, or the climax of the video. And then you're sort of left wondering, well, how do they reach that point? There's almost an anxiety that's created there. I need to fulfill that. You see the same thing with Korean soap operas where it starts with a murder and you want to figure out how the murder happened, who did the killing. There's a sense of uncertainty of how that happened. Looking across thousands of pieces of content, we found that uncertain emotions encourage engagement. Language that evokes uncertain emotions, for example, anxiety and surprise, led readers to keep reading. Uncertainty led readers to stick around to resolve what they didn't know. And this is one of the key things that people miss when they create YouTube videos is that sense of uncertainty. Oh, which product is he going to end up recommending? Or what's the flaw in this otherwise perfect product? And you need to stick around to find out. Now, you want to use the words you, your, yourself in social media posts. These increase engagement are more likely to receive comments. This is something copywriters have known for a long time that you is a very powerful word. So, for example, you could create a tip sheet that's 5 tips you can use to save money, calling out the reader, very important. However, if you're creating copy for something like a support page, it actually has the opposite effect. When you use words like you and your, those are rated as less helpful. In fact, you want to take it a step further. And not only do you want to avoid words like you and yourself in support pages, you even want to use the passive voice. So, for example, instead of saying you should free up space, you say space can be freed up by doing this and that. One of the reasons is because there's a sense of blame. If there's a problem, you're looking for a solution and you don't want to make it feel like all the responsibilities on you. So with support pages, it's kind of the opposite of what you find with marketing pages. Now, another key thing that you want to do is you want to be confident and you want to show power. And that's really important when you want to persuade people. So avoid things like saying sort of, maybe, you seem more credible when you're more confident in what you're saying. You want to ditch the hedges, the things that water down what your statements are, the points are that you're making. So for example, may, might, in my opinion, kind of, could, appears, a bit, generally. Be more affirmative. People are less likely to buy a recommended product when you're using this kind of watered down language. So both you, people that are helping you with reviews, people that are helping you promote your products, people that are promoters, you really want to get them to get the right confident language to use. Don't hesitate. Try to avoid using past tense and convert those into present tense, and know when to express doubt. And that's usually when you're dealing with a contentious issue and you're dealing with people that are highly likely to disagree 180 degrees with what you're saying. And that's where expressing doubt and being a little less confident makes them more likely to listen to what you're saying. Listeners are persuaded when communicators seem more certain or confident about what they are communicating. So there was some research, for example, showing that financial advisors saying there was a 93% chance of a stock going up versus 76% were the ones that people were likely to choose. And even if the advisor is wrong or less accurate, it doesn't matter. People want the person that seems more confident. And we see this all the time in politics. So to seem more confident, you want to avoid words like probable or likely. Instead, say things like absolutely, definitively, clearly, guaranteed, unambiguous, essential, obviously, undeniable, everyone, every time. These convey a high degree of confidence, so it's very important in your copywriting to use these. Avoid words like probable or likely once again. There are 6 types of magic words to summarize what's happening here in the book. So there's those that activate identity and agency, those that convey confidence, those that ask the right questions, those that leverage concreteness, those that employ emotion, and those that harness similarity and difference. Activate identity and agency. So you want to demonstrate who's in charge, who's to blame. You want to use nouns and prefer them over verbs to persuade people, and use words such as you. Convey confidence. People prefer confident people when they're, even when they're wrong. Saying a restaurant has rather than had is going to be more impactful, more likely that somebody's actually going to show up to the restaurant, and more likely to visit. Ask the right questions. So asking the right questions shows you care. And when you get questions that are too difficult to answer, you can try to deflect them. And this can also be done in your copywriting, for example, with FAQs. You can try to answer as many questions as possible. You can have online chat through your website that encourages people to ask questions either to a chatbot or to a sales representative, etc. Leverage concreteness. So use words like fixing because that's better than solving to improve customer satisfaction, and use specificity. So for example, it's better to say gray t-shirt versus top. Employ emotion. It's going to hold attention more and keep up engagement. Harness similarity and difference. It's easier to understand and get a positive response when you're using the kind of language that somebody is used to seeing, or that's sort of insider language for your target audience.